The vast expanse of the Bass Strait acts as a treacherous barrier between the Australian mainland and the island of Tasmania. It is a stretch of water famous for its wildly unpredictable currents and for swallowing massive ships whole throughout recorded history. On the evening of October 21st in the year 1978, the calm waters betrayed no hint of the terror that was about to unfold above them. The sky was clear, and the stars shone with a brilliance that usually brings comfort to those navigating the darkness. However, for one lone pilot, this serene atmosphere would soon transform into a theater of the unexplained. The silence of the night was about to be broken by a series of radio transmissions that continue to haunt the aviation world decades later. The recording of that night remains one of the most chilling pieces of audio in the history of aviation disasters and unexplained phenomena. It documents the real-time disintegration of a routine flight into a scenario of absolute confusion and fear. There is a primal horror in hearing a human voice transition from professional calm to bewildered panic as reality seems to warp around them. The pilot was not screaming, but his questions revealed a mind struggling to comprehend something that should not exist. The final words spoken before the radio cut to static have echoed through the nightmares of those who have studied the case. It serves as a grim reminder that our skies may hold secrets that we are not meant to understand or survive. This story is not merely about a plane crash or a mechanical failure over the ocean. It is a narrative that challenges the boundaries of what we accept as possible within our physical world. It involves a young man with his whole life ahead of him and a passion for the skies that ultimately led him into the heart of a mystery. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich is classified by many as the most compelling aviation mystery in Australian history. It blends the cold, hard facts of radar logs and flight transcripts with the terrifying possibility of an encounter with the unknown. We must look back at that fateful spring evening to understand the darkness that descended upon a single-engine Cessna. Frederick Valentich was a 20-year-old man with a deep and abiding love for aviation that defined his entire existence. He was an enthusiastic pilot who spent every spare moment thinking about flying, or actually in the cockpit. Despite his passion, he was not considered a naturally gifted aviator and had struggled with some of his examinations. He had failed certain commercial license subjects, but his determination never wavered for a moment. He had logged roughly 150 hours of flying time, which gave him enough experience to fly with confidence. His family described him as a serious young man who respected the rules of aviation. He was also known to have a strong interest in the subject of unidentified flying objects. The young pilot had planned a trip across the Bass Strait to King Island, On that particular Saturday evening, the official reason for the flight was to pick up some friends and bring them back to the mainland. He had filed a flight plan that would take him from Moorabbin Airport down the coast to Cape Otway and then across the water. It was a route that many pilots had flown before without incident. Frederick Valentich arrived at the airport in the late afternoon to prepare his aircraft for the journey south. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his demeanor or his preparations on that day. He checked the weather reports and the aircraft logs with the diligence of a pilot who wants to ensure a safe return. The aircraft he would be piloting was a Cessna 182L with the registration call signed Delta Senior Juliet. This light aircraft was a reliable machine that was popular among private pilots for its stability and ease of handling. It was equipped with the standard navigation and communication radios required for a night flight over water. The Cessna had been fueled to capacity, giving it a range that far exceeded the requirements for the trip to King Island. Mechanics had serviced the plane recently, and there were no outstanding maintenance issues reported. As Frederick Valentich walked across the tarmac to the waiting plane, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The weather conditions on the evening of October 21st were described by meteorologists as nearly perfect for flying. There was a light wind blowing, and visibility was excellent, extending for miles in every direction. The Bass Strait, which is often churned by violent storms, was unusually calm and reflected the darkening sky like a black mirror. Other pilots in the area reported smooth flying conditions with no turbulence to speak of. It was the kind of night that aviators dream of, where the world feels peaceful and the engine hums a steady rhythm. There was absolutely no indication that a meteorological phenomenon would play a role in the events to come. Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport at 6:19 in the evening, leaving the city of Melbourne behind him. He climbed to his cruising altitude and turned his aircraft toward the southern coast of Victoria. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape and painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. As darkness fell, the lights of the coastal towns began to twinkle below him, acting as guideposts on his journey. He maintained regular radio contact with the Melbourne Flight Service Unit, reporting his position and status. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the flight plan he had filed earlier that day. The initial leg of the journey was completely uneventful. As the Cessna passed over Cape Otway, the pilot left the safety of the land behind and ventured out over the dark water. The lighthouse at the Cape would have been a comforting beacon fading in the distance behind him. Ahead lay the emptiness of the Bass Strait and the remote destination of King Island. At this point, Frederick Valentich was alone in the night sky, surrounded by stars and the black ocean below. The sensation of flying at night over water can be disorienting. But he reported no issues to the ground controllers. His voice on the radio remained calm and professional as he gave his position updates. He was closing the distance to his destination with every passing minute. It was at 7:06 in the evening that the routine nature of the flight abruptly shattered. Frederick Valentich keyed his microphone and asked the flight service officer a strange question. He inquired if there was any known traffic below 5,000 feet in his vicinity. The flight service officer on duty was a man named Steve Roby, who would become a key figure in this story. Roby checked his radar and flight schedules quickly before responding to the pilot. He informed Frederick Valentich that there was no known traffic in the area at that altitude. This answer seemed to confuse the pilot, who insisted that he was seeing something large. Frederick Valentich reported that he could see a large aircraft just below him and requested clarification on its identity. He described the object as having 4 bright lights that appeared to be landing lights. The tone of his voice was not yet panicked, but it carried a note of distinct curiosity and concern. He seemed unable to identify the type of aircraft, despite his proximity to it. Steve Roby asked him to confirm the type of aircraft, but the pilot could not. The object passed him at high speed, appearing to toy with the much slower Cessna. This was the first indication that something uninvited had entered the airspace. The mysterious craft did not simply pass by and disappear into the night as a normal plane would. Frederick Valentich reported that the object was now approaching him from the east. He stated that it seemed to be playing some sort of game with him. The pilot sounded increasingly unsettled as he described the movements of the other vessel. It was flying at speeds that seemed impossible for conventional aircraft and making maneuvers that defied physics. The flight service officer continued to ask for details, trying to make sense of the situation. He asked the pilot to estimate the size and speed of the unknown traffic. The description that came next added a layer of high strangeness to the encounter that chills listeners to this day. Frederick Valentich stated that the object was orbiting above him and had a shiny, metallic surface. He also mentioned seeing a green light emanating from the craft. This detail about the green light is a common motif in similar, unexplained aerial phenomena cases. The pilot emphasized that the object was not an aircraft in the traditional sense. His voice began to tremble slightly as the reality of his situation set in. He was alone over the ocean, being stalked by something he could not understand. Steve Roby asked if the pilot could identify the intentions of the aircraft, or if it was military in nature. Frederick Valentich replied that the object was now vanishing and then reappearing in different locations. This blinking in and out of existence suggested a technology far beyond anything known at the time. The pilot struggled to keep his eyes on the object as it moved with blinding speed. He was forced to turn his head rapidly to track its erratic path around his Cessna. The conversation between the pilot and the flight controller became a lifeline in the darkness. Roby tried to keep the pilot calm while seeking any logical explanation. Suddenly, the situation escalated from observation to direct physical interference with the Cessna. Frederick Valentich reported that his engine had begun to run roughly and was coughing. This is a terrifying development for any pilot flying a single-engine aircraft over open water. Engine failure means a forced landing in the cold, dark ocean with little chance of survival. The pilot sounded genuinely frightened as he described the mechanical issues. He suspected that the presence of the metallic object was somehow affecting his plane. The connection between the UFO and the physical malfunction of the aircraft suggests a powerful electromagnetic influence. The flight controller asked the pilot what his intentions were now that the engine was failing. Frederick Valentich replied that he would proceed to King Island if possible. However, the object was not done with him yet and continued its harassment. The pilot reported that the strange craft was now hovering directly on top of him. The fear in his voice was palpable as he realized he was trapped. He was caught between the failing mechanics of his own plane and the menacing presence above. The vastness of the sky, which usually offered freedom, now felt like a closing cage. The final transmission from Delta Senior Juliet is etched into the history of Australian aviation. Frederick Valentich keyed his microphone one last time to speak to Steve Roby. His voice was breathless and filled with a realization of horror. He said those famous last words, that the strange object was hovering, and it is not an aircraft. Following this sentence, the radio channel did not go silent immediately. Instead, there was a terrifying sound that was recorded on the tape. It was described as a metallic scraping or grinding noise that lasted for 17 seconds. After 17 seconds of that unearthly metallic noise, all contact with the pilot was lost. The radio frequency fell silent, leaving Steve Roby calling out into the void. There was no response from Delta Senior Juliet, and no distress beacon was activated. The sudden silence was more deafening than the noise had been. The flight controller tried repeatedly to raise the pilot, but there was only static. The time was 7:12 in the evening, just 6 minutes after the first report of the object. In that short window of time, a routine flight had ended in total mystery. An alert was raised immediately, and a search and rescue operation was launched within minutes. The Royal Australian Air Force dispatched a P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft to the scene. Several civilian aircraft and ships in the vicinity were also asked to look for signs of the missing Cessna. The search area was focused on the last known position of the pilot near Cape Otway. Searchers expected to find an oil slick or floating debris from a crash. The waters of the Bass Strait are cold, but debris usually surfaces after an impact. Rescuers worked through the night, hoping against hope to find the young pilot alive. The search continued for several days, covering over 1,000 square miles of ocean. Despite the perfect weather conditions and the massive resources deployed, not a single trace was found. There was no wreckage, no oil slick, and no body ever recovered. It was as if the Cessna and its pilot had been plucked from the sky by a giant hand. The complete lack of debris is one of the most baffling aspects of the case. Even in high-impact crashes into water, there is usually some flotsam left behind. The ocean refused to yield any clues about the fate of Frederick Valentich. The disappearance devastated the Valentich family, who waited in agony for news that never came. Guido Valentich, the father of the pilot, became a tragic figure in the media. He held onto the belief that his son had not crashed, but had been taken by the object he described. The father studied UFO phenomena for the rest of his life, searching for answers. He believed that his son was still alive somewhere beyond the stars. This heartbreaking hope highlights the human toll of such unexplained disappearances. The lack of a body or wreckage denied the family any chance of closure. The Department of Transport released the transcript of the radio communications, which fueled intense public interest. The story became a sensation, not just in Australia, but around the world. The detail about the green lights and the metallic structure fascinated UFO researchers. Skeptics tried to explain the incident as pilot disorientation or suicide. They suggested that Frederick Valentich had become confused by the stars or lights on the ground. However, these theories failed to account for the detailed description of the orbiting object. The pilot was flying a stable aircraft in clear weather conditions. One theory proposed that the pilot had seen his own reflection in the calm water and became disoriented. This illusion is known as the lean and can be fatal to inexperienced pilots. Yet Frederick Valentich was reporting an object above him, not below him. He described it banking and orbiting, which a reflection would not do. Furthermore, the engine trouble he reported suggests a physical external factor. The mechanical failure coincident with the sighting is difficult to explain away as a hallucination. The metallic noise at the end of the transmission also defies the disorientation theory. Another disturbing piece of evidence surfaced 5 years after the disappearance. An engine cowl flap from a Cessna 182 washed ashore on Flinders Island. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation noted that the part came from the same range of serial numbers as the missing plane. However, without more debris, it was impossible to confirm it belonged to Delta Senior Juliet. If it was from his plane, it suggested a crash. but did not explain the radio calls. The ocean currents could have carried debris for miles over the years. This single piece of metal remains the only potential physical link to the aircraft. The case attracted the attention of independent researchers and photographers. On the same evening as the disappearance, a man named Roy Manifold was taking sunset photos at Cape Otway. He set up his camera on a tripod to capture the beauty of the twilight over the ocean. When his photos were developed, they revealed something that he had not seen with his naked eye. One of the images showed a fast-moving object emerging from the water near the lighthouse. The object appeared surrounded by a cloud of vapor or mist. Analysis of the manifold photograph by optical experts suggested the object was moving at tremendous speed. It was estimated to be roughly 20 feet in diameter, appearing as a dark blur. Critics argued it could have been a developing error or a flying insect close to the lens. However, the timing and location aligned chillingly with the pilot's distress calls. The photo added a visual element to the nightmare described on the radio. It suggested that the object might have come from the water itself. This introduced the concept of unidentified submerged objects into the investigation. The legacy of the Frederick Valentich mystery persists because it taps into our deepest fears of the unknown. It combines the claustrophobia of a cockpit with the agoraphobia of the open ocean. The idea of being hunted by a superior technology in the dark is a primal terror. The pilot was not a military target or a person of influence. He was just a citizen. This randomness implies that anyone could fall victim to such an encounter. It strips away the safety we feel when we travel through the modern world. Over the decades, many people have reported seeing strange lights over the Bass Strait. The area has earned a reputation similar to the Bermuda Triangle for strange occurrences. Locals tell stories of silent craft moving over the water and disappearing into the waves. The disappearance of 1978 is the cornerstone of this local folklore. It serves as a warning to those who look up at the night sky too long. The ocean and the sky seem to conspire to keep their secrets in this part of the world. Psychologists have analyzed the transcript, looking for signs of a breakdown or delusion in the pilot. They note that his voice remained coherent enough to give detailed reports until the very end. He was checking his instruments and responding to the flight controller logically. This suggests he was describing an external reality rather than an internal hallucination. The fear in his voice was a rational response to an irrational situation. He was a man confronting something that his mind could not process. The plaque erected at Cape Otway stands as a permanent memorial to the young pilot. It overlooks the water where he was last seen and offers a place for reflection. Visitors often stand there and scan the horizon, wondering what happened that night. The mystery attracts tourists and paranormal investigators from all over the globe. It ensures that the name Frederick Valentich will not be forgotten by history. The plaque is a silent witness to the enduring question of what lies beyond our atmosphere. In the end, we are left with the haunting recording of a young man facing his doom. The transcript reads like a screenplay for a horror movie, but it was real life. The final seconds of that transmission are some of the most disturbing moments ever captured on tape. They represent the boundary between the known world and the abyssal unknown. The metallic scraping sound is the audio signature of a mystery that may never be solved. It is the sound of a door closing forever on a human life. The official conclusion of the Department of Transport was that the cause of the disappearance could not be determined. This open verdict satisfies no one, but it is the only honest answer available. Without a body or a wreck, we cannot say for certain that the pilot died that night. This ambiguity allows for wild theories ranging from abduction to a staged disappearance. However, the most likely and terrifying truth is that he encountered something real, something that technology and science have yet to fully explain. We must consider the possibility that Frederick Valentich became a victim of a phenomenon we are too afraid to admit exists. The consistency of his description with other UFO sightings is difficult to ignore. The green lights the metallic hull, and the silent operation are hallmarks of the genre. If he was telling the truth, then we share our skies with a non-human intelligence. This implication is far more frightening than any mechanical failure. It forces us to reevaluate our place in the universe. The Bass Strait continues to roll on indifferent to the tragedy it witnessed decades ago. The waves that cover the potential crash site keep their secrets buried deep in the dark. Pilots still fly the route from Melbourne to King Island every day without incident. But every now and then, a pilot might look out their window and remember the story. They might scan the darkness for a green light or a metallic glint. The story of Frederick Valentich serves as a ghostly co-pilot for everyone who flies that route. The story of Frederick Valentich is a quintessential modern ghost story because it uses technology to record the haunting. It is not a story of chains rattling in an old house, but of radio waves and radar. The ghost in this machine is the voice of the pilot, preserved forever on magnetic tape. It reminds us that horror can strike in the most modern of settings. The cockpit of an airplane is a place of logic and control until it isn't. When the impossible happens, the instruments offer no salvation. As we listen to the static that followed the final transmission, we are left with a lingering dread. The silence is heavy with the weight of the unanswered questions. Did he crash into the water, or was he taken elsewhere by the object? The lack of answers is what keeps the story alive in our collective consciousness. We fear the unknown, and this story is the ultimate manifestation of that fear. It is a puzzle with missing pieces that form a terrifying picture. The encounter challenges our arrogance as a species, believing we are masters of our domain. Frederick Valentich was flying a machine that represented the pinnacle of human engineering for personal transport. Yet he was effortlessly outmaneuvered by something far superior. The encounter reduced him to prey in a high-altitude hunt. It serves as a humbling reminder of our limitations. We are small and vulnerable when we venture into the vast darkness. In the quiet moments of the night, when the sky is clear, look up toward the stars. Remember the young pilot who loved to fly and who vanished while doing what he loved most. Think of the father who waited for a son who would never return home. The tragedy is human, but the cause remains alien and obscure. The story of the pilot and the green lights will continue to be told. It is a warning whispered on the wind over the Bass Strait. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich remains a haunting void in the history of aviation. It is a story that refuses to die because the evidence is so visceral and disturbing. The transmission captures the exact moment a human being crosses the threshold into the unknown. It is a permanent scar on the psyche of those who look for answers in the sky until the wreckage is found or the truth is revealed. The ghost of Delta Senior Juliet flies on. The final transmission echoes forever. It is not an aircraft. Ultimately, the story leaves us with a sense of profound unease about the nature of reality. It suggests that there are forces at work that operate outside our understanding of physics. The pilot was a witness to something that broke the rules of our world. His disappearance was the price he paid for that forbidden knowledge. We are left safe on the ground, wondering what he saw in those final moments. The darkness of the Bass Strait holds the answer, and it is not speaking.